Hello friends, I welcome you all to Tech Academy. Today we will be discussing a very interesting topic which is called as Angular. And the technology which I am talking about is a front-end technology. So before going into in-depth analysis of what a front-end technology is, what a back-end technology is, first let us try to understand what technology is. So when it comes to application developments, as a software engineer, the path which we took. So as part of this, there is something which everyone has to understand is all about what is a software, how is it making the life more easier. And in particular to that, today we'll be discussing on something more powerful, which is Angular, and it is also denoted as front-end technology. So before going into that, first let us try to understand what is the history which actually gave me this present. So let us traverse back to 40 to 50, 60 years back when this application development has started, and today we are talking about Angular, right? And why is that is so great and powerful technology. So I think my board is visible. Now coming to a web application, right? So let us first try to understand what a web application is, which we are using in current world. So web application is something where there is a server. Kindly mark my words. There is a server and there is a client. Okay. There may be enormous data. Okay. Now, as a user, I want to consume this data. So when I'm talking about a user is a client. In other words, anything that is coming into your web browser. For example, Chrome, Edge, Opera. These are all called as client engines. Now, suppose there is a page, there is something which I developed. I want to showcase this to entire world. Okay. I have developed something. Assume that, okay, one fine day definitely we will become developers. Okay. And my challenge here is today we are in day 1. By day 7, you will definitely write an Angular code with a thought process, with a project in your mind. I challenge this to you. I need just 30 minutes of yours daily, which comes to 7 days, around 3.5 hours. In 3.5 hours, we will see that you will write your first web application in Angular. Now, coming to a web browser. When we discuss this in our classes, slowly, day by day, we will definitely understand what a web browser is, how the web browser engine actually works, and how this Angular is behaving within these web browsers and giving us the final output. Now coming to client, suppose client is a consumer. Okay. So now as a developer in future, 7th or 8th day, you have developed an application which your clients wants to see. For that, you have to host this application. We call this as host process. You have to host this application into a server. So there are two types of servers. One is Windows, the other one is Linux. We can host Angular application in any of these two server configurations. We will understand what a server is when we come to build process of Angular, right? How to host the application, how to make sure the application is working as expected. So these things we will learn in our new course. I believe this is understood to you. So there is a client who is consuming what you have developed. So this is the process of a web application. So when a communication is triggered from client, for example, you type a URL called as www.google.com. What happens is, and you press the enter, then what happens is a request is sent to the server. So we call it as a request. And server detects that, oh, okay, this person has requested to a Google page. The server will send a response. Okay, so we call this cycle, this cycle, from where this has initiated, and see, for example, it has started from request process, and then it went to server, and from server the response came. So you can see a cycle right here, a circle, right? So this we call as a cycle, and it is called as round trip. Okay. Now, for example, there may be chances that you have developed a page where you are taking some Aadhaar information and saving it into database. Okay. So in that case, you don't want the server to respond you back saying that, okay, after saving. So, there are multiple challenges, multiple scenarios, not challenges. There are multiple scenarios where this round trip can be expedited. Okay, for example, I'm just making a request to the server. I don't want any response. So this we call as a trip. Hope this is understood. Now, so this is how the web application actually behaves. We need a server where you will be deploying, where you will be storing the code that you have developed. Okay, we call that as a deployment process. The code that you have developed, for example, you have written an if statement that you will be saving in the server. The client will be accessing your if statement, and based on the conditions, the response will be sent back to the client. So for this, we need a technology. We need a technology to achieve this task. Assume this is the problem statement that we are discussing. To achieve this task, the existence of web applications came into picture. So always remember, web applications are HTTP. And remember this word HTTP because in future we will be using this HTTP. So I am talking about HTTP. So HTTP stands for Hypertext Transport Protocol. Very good. I know the abbreviation of Hypertext Transport Protocol. But can you tell me what do we mean by hyper? Okay, I can understand a text is a language, some kind of symbols, whatever the case. A transport, okay, something where we are transporting. A protocol means designated solution, not solution, designated process. Within this protocol only I have to send. But my important question is, what is hyper? So in generic sense, hyper means something changed, something dynamic in nature. So a text which is dynamic in nature, I'm transferring that via some protocols. So this is the actual meaning of hypertext transport protocol. So protocol is some designated routes within which this text is getting transferred. Okay, Hari, you told very good, excellent. What sort of text can I transfer? What sort of text can be transferred via this protocol? In this case, let us try to understand two different types of technologies, not technologies, two different types of languages, and how these languages got evolved during the course of time. The very first language which I would like to introduce to you all is HTML. Now, what is HTML? It is Hypertext Markup Language. Very good, excellent. Text, I can understand again, it's a symbol. Markup is some designated format. A language is okay, which can be communicated. Again, the same question. What do we mean by hyper in this case? So a hyper is dynamic in nature, a dynamic text which is within a particular format. In that format, if I write some code, that can be transferred via hypertext transfer protocol. So we just spoke about servers, right? So a server will act as a listener and a provider where the HTTP request and responses comes. So what I'm telling is, this is all about any language, not any language, a language which is of type marker can be transferred via HTTP protocols. So when I'm talking about a server, it acts as a listener and provider where these HTTP requests and responses can be sent. Now coming to Angular, just make a wild guess. Does Angular support HTTP and HTML? Means a transfer protocol, means some sort of requests and responses via this markup language? And yes. So to learn Angular, to get mastery in Angular, we have to understand the HTML from the grassroots. Unless until you understand the HTML concepts, right, you cannot go with a design, you cannot go with a component segregations, you cannot go with element placements. Unless until you don't know what an element itself is, unless until we don't know what sort of level I have to use via HTML, till that time we will be not in a position to create the world's best Angular applications. So our second and third day, we will be discussing about HTML tags, how those has to be placed, how this has to be developed, and how the behavior of this goes into picture. Now, coming to, okay, Hari, I just understood what HTTP is. Okay, it is a transport protocol where I can, for example, I transfer some amount via my Paytm or Phone Pay, Google Pay. I made a request saying that, okay, 10 rupees to this person. So it gets transferred to the other person. So here I am acting as a server, he is acting as a client. And if he is requesting me via WhatsApp or something, saying that, Hari, can you please transfer some amount to me, some X amount to me, then he is making a request. After taking that request into consideration, I am giving a response saying that, hey, I don't have that much amount, or I can only give this much amount, or okay, I agree that I'll pay you the amount. So these scenarios actually makes a judgment, means it is the code that you wrote. Hey, if your account has the amount that is been asked by the other person, act like this. Else less than or equals to some conditions we will be writing, right? So those things comes into consideration while developing this application. So to understand Angular, first we have to understand what a HTML is. Now let me park this HTML aside. We will now discuss something interesting about a browser, because unless until you know about the browser, right, we will not be in a position to code what actually we are willing to code. So let us try to understand the greatest engine humans have ever built, which is not a satellite, which is not a vehicle, which is not even a mobile phone. It is the web browser, which transformed the entire technology. So let us try to understand a web browser. When I'm talking at a high level, I'll just discuss now. At a very high level, in depth we will be understanding when we are into real-time coding, right? How to do things, what are Angular components, other things. At that time we will try to understand. Now let us try to visualize that this is a browser. Okay. Now I'll say www.youtube.com. As we discussed, a request is sent, a server receives it, it responds back. So this is a round trip. Okay. But assume you have created a blue color ribbon, a blue color button. Assume that you have created a text box with 50 pixel length, or you categorized that this text box should only accept numbers. This is a drop down. So elements we will be discussing on HTML class. So I'm just giving it a high level. But how will my browser recognize that you designed a text box which actually has to accept numbers only? For example, in India, we have a pin code, okay, and pin code cannot be alphabets. So when I do any sort of operations on the text box, it should always prompt me that if I type A, it should say that, hey, A is not acceptable because you are writing a pin code, and pin code is of numeric format in our country. Okay, so how will the browser knows all type of variety of code that you will be writing in future? So to write better code, let us try to understand what actually a browser is. So now I'll be going with the concept of web browser. Till round trip, what we have discussed, we understood. Okay, now let us try to understand how this web browser actually behaves. Now let us take a use case. Let us take a solution designing where I want you to design a web application which should accept address and name. Only these two are enough for me. So when I'm talking about address, there should be a text box which is pin code text box in India, and it should accept numbers only. This is a very simple problem statement. Let us try to understand how this problem statement actually is solved in web browser. So web browser is categorized into 3 segments. So let us call it as a segment 1, segment 2 and segment 3. So when I'm talking about segment 1, segment 1 contains HTML engine. So HTML engine actually detects what is the markup language that you wrote. For example, input type equals to text box, button, whatever it is. Okay, these elements are read in this engine. The second segment talks about CSS. So we call CSS as cascading style sheets. So when I'm talking about cascading style sheets, right? So let us take a property statement where India has some X states. If I select any of the states, it should show all the popular cities. If I select India, it should show me all the states. If I select any of the state, it should show me all the popular cities. So now here the story starts with one to many, and here again one to many. Got my point? So this one to many and one to many is cascading in nature. If you select India, it will show Indian states only. If you select US, it will show US states only. So the story actually starts with a parent element, and then it is cascaded to the child level. So there will be a parent style sheet, and there are chances that there may be cascading style sheets, child level style sheets. So segment 2 actually recognizes the cascading, the styles that we gave. For example, I want this button to be blue color, or there should be something which is in red color. These color combination, these UI lookup, these things are actually handled in this engine. Okay. And the third and final is the most most important engine, which we should definitely know. Unless until we know about this engine, right, whatever code you write in Angular will never be understood. The most powerful engine for a web browser is JS engine. Mark it as bold, italic and underline in your brain. Unless until there is JS engine, right, this web browser is of no use. So when I am talking about JS engine, it actually represents JavaScript engine. So JavaScript engine, there may be certain actions which you want to do on browser. For example, in this use case that we discussed, my pin code should be accepting only numbers. Now let us try to again step back and discuss about the route tree. Suppose here is a text box. If I type A, this is my pin code text box. If I type A here, if I am validating this A in my server, what actually happens? Imagine in a slow motion. User came, he typed A in this text box. Then a key press event is triggered. The data goes to server, and in server it validates whether it is, if ASCII code of A falls within the number or not. Those type of code we wrote, and then the response comes back, and then it will prompt the user saying that, hey, pin code should be of numeric in nature. In this slow motion, what actually happened was, an character A was actually visible to the user till the time the response comes back. What happens during this response time? Candidate entered B and then he entered 1. So it goes to server, comes back, goes to server, comes back, goes to server, comes. It is a long process to validate these type of things via a server. So JavaScript actually helps you in developing, in writing content in code which can be actually restricted on browser itself. So we have to understand the core essence of JavaScript. It gives you the power, it gives you the entrance to the technology where you can handle greatest things on server. So when I'm talking about these things, right, okay, Hari, this looks good to the best of my knowledge. This is all about browser, which is divided into 3 segments, segment 1, segment 2, segment 3, all good, sounds good, but what actually we call this model? This model is called as DOM, Document Object Model. Why we call it as a document object model is any web page that is loaded in a browser is represented as document. Within this page, there may be multiple elements, drop downs, checkboxes, or we may write style sheets, we may write JavaScripts. This is called as an object. JavaScript objects or browser objects. When I'm talking about browser object, it is actually document objects, which is of nature, which is designed in a segregated model. Means there is a model contract. Let us say within this contract, these elements will fall. So what are those 3 contracts? Those contracts are our segment 1 contract, segment 2 contracts, segment 3 contracts. So in this model is divided as HTML contract or CSS contract or a JavaScript contract. Hope you understood this. Now, this is all about a browser. Now let us try to understand one good technology which is called as, now let us try to understand one good technology, okay, which is named as Angular. And when we Google it or anything we do, right, it always say it is a front-end technology. So what is a front end? What is back end? What are the layers that we have? So as I told, anything which is loaded into client, that is a browser, is front end. Why it is front end? Because as a user, I'm able to see. Because I'm able to see, I am the front end person. And things which are actually happening, I cannot see, which are happening back to me, are called as back end. So for example, I want to see how many, let us take one small. Okay, I want to see how many people are enrolled into my class. Okay, if I make a request via my front end, and the response should also come to me, so because I'm viewing it, there will be a backend request. Within this backend request, it may go to a server and then to a database and fetch the data and get the data back to me as process of a round trip. So this data which I am actually getting is triggered via a front end within the browser, goes to backend. It can be an API, and then the API may get connected to database. It will create a response object, and that response object is loaded into my document object. So this is Angular is a front-end technology. So what do we mean by a front-end technology is anything which can be handled and displayed on the client machine. Can it make backend calls? Yes. But how? Via HTTP, hypertext transfer protocols, where I can do a get, post. This we will discuss in depth, okay? Put, patch, whatever the case. Via some services, I'll connect it to HTTP, and this HTTP engine will connect to my backend. My backend will then connect to database. My database then connect to the response object of an API, and API will give me the response in JSON format. So these words may be new, or some of you may be knowing that, but still what I'm just iterating is there is something, some request came, something happened, and some output came, which I'm actually designing. 7th or 8th day, you will do this entire process. There are free APIs over the web. We will consume those APIs, and then we will design our application with pure Angular. So Angular is a front-end technology as per this use case. At a high level, today's class is only high level, okay? In depth, we will be going with the code that we built and how these components are getting behavior. Very good, Hari. Okay, I understood that, okay? Angular is a front-end technology. As you guys know, my name is Hari. My parents put that name, gave that name to me. Maybe because they consider this name suits me. Who is actually the father of Angular? As we all know, Google Corporation developed this technology, a front-end technology. Now the biggest question is, why did they name it Angular? They can always name it Googler, right? They can name something else, right? But why they named it as an Angular? And even React, why is React named as React? Forget about React. Why a .NET is named as .NET? Okay, so let us try to understand the history. Before going to the history of Angular, right? Let us try to understand why the name Angular is given to this front-end technology. I'm just dividing this board because I need that. Angular, the fall and the ultimate rise. These topic we will discuss now. So, as we discussed, Angular is a front-end technology within the web application framework, web app framework. We will discuss about frameworks also later class. Within the web app framework, Angular is a front-end technology. The name of Angular came into visualization, was thrown into picture because the components that we develop within Angular, within this, let me not repeat the name Angular. Angular actually behaves on some components. Sorry, my bad again. This technology actually, the technology which Google provided. So as we now came to know that this technology is a web application framework which is a front-end technology. This technology actually behaves on different views. V1, V2, V3. Each view can have some inbuilt components or some directives or some services or something X, something Y, something Z. So these views are actually interacting with each other. So when this interaction is happening, it can be a straight interaction or an angled interaction. If it is a straight interaction, I'm just calling view 1, I'm calling view 2 via view 1. If it is not a straight interaction, there may be some other services I will be calling first, some XYZ services. These XYZ services will be now getting loaded into view 2. So as you can see, it is a straight interaction or an angled interaction between these views. So as such, most of them are angled in nature. It is Angular, the name came. The interaction of different components within this technology has named this as an Angular. Now if, let us park this Angular component aside, why React? Why the name React? The main action behind React technology is, we discussed about this DOM component, right? DOM, Document Object Model. What this technology actually changes within this DOM model. So it makes this DOM model reactive in nature, interactive in nature. So is the name React came. So now we know, because the behavior of these components are angled in nature, the interaction between these components are angled in nature, the name of Angular came into picture. Now, okay Hari, this sounds good, but why the fall and the rise? So friends, this is about an introduction class. I would definitely like to talk to you more on why Angular failed and why Angular rised again. What happened with Angular and why Angular died, and then it took a rebirth, which is now actually ruling the world of front-end technologies. With this, I'll come to a conclusion of my introduction. Do like, share, subscribe to my channel, and let me know any suggestions which I would like to follow. I would definitely like to listen, and I will definitely like to improvise myself. Till then, thank you. Till then, thank you. Jai Hind.